Once a month, Paula Pant, host of the Afford Anything podcast, answers voicemail questions the listeners send in. Here's one now.
Hi, Paula. I've been following your real estate income report, and I have found it super helpful in determining if real estate is a good fit for me. Since I'm starting out, unlike you, I don't have the benefit of economy of scale on my side, meaning I would be starting out with one unit. So I was wondering, using your biggest loser property, and that's loser with an air quote, would you still be profitable? Because certain things like your time, an accountant for taxes, bookkeeping software, I assume that doesn't increase all that much above one property. And perhaps for your contractor, property manager, insurance, etc., you're probably getting a discount because of multiple properties. If it wasn't for all the economy of scale benefits, what would your numbers look like? Sorry, that's probably a big request to ask, but I think it would be something of value for your newbie listeners like me that would be starting out with one property. Thanks.
That is such a good question. Okay, so I was actually really curious about this. So I went back and I looked at my two biggest loser properties. And those two are houses number 3 and number 4. And the way that I calculate that is I look at the price to rent ratio of the property. And the way to calculate that is really simple. The price of the property is the numerator, and the gross yearly rent of the property is the denominator. Now, a word about this numerator. When I say price, what I'm referring to is the purchase price plus any upfront repairs that are required to get it rent ready for the first tenant. So, for example, for house number 4, we bought it for $120,000. We had to put another $3,000 into it up front in order to get it rent ready for that first tenant. So that price, that numerator, is $123,000. So that's what I use as the numerator, and then I divide that by the gross rent, the total rent that I collect before any expenses over the course of a year. Now, house number 4, at the time that we bought it, rented for $1,500 per month. So this gives us a price to rent ratio of 6.83. And of all the properties that I've purchased, that is my worst price to rent ratio. So that house number 4 is the biggest loser. Now, the numbers on that house have changed because approximately a year ago, we did a renovation on that house. That renovation cost exactly $13,648. I take better notes these days. And now that property rents for $1,795 a month, which is actually worse than what we were expecting. When we first did the renovation, we'd listed it for $1,895 a month, and we received 2 applications at that rate. But then, long story short, we found these tenants who were willing to sign a multi-year lease, and so they negotiated the rent down by $100 a month in order to stay there for a longer time. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Point is, the numbers on that house have changed because we added value through a renovation, and so that makes the price to rent ratio, actually, hold on, let me calculate this right now. All right, let's see, $123,000 plus $13,600 gives us a numerator of $136,600 divided by 1795 times 12. Okay. So that gives us a new price to rent ratio of 6.34. So anyway, zooming out, the bigger picture of what I'm trying to say is that the biggest loser property was house number 4 when we bought it. Okay, that was a long tangent about PR ratios, so let me get to your actual question, which was how do economies of scale influence this? So let's try to figure that, and I'm figuring this out within the answer as much as you are. So what I'm gonna do in order to figure this out is let's take property number 4, the biggest loser property. Let's take it pre-renovation, so when it was getting worse returns, and let's figure out what the cap rate on that one would have been. We'll walk through this example with the assumption that I don't have any economies of scale, which means that all of these ancillary expenses, such as bookkeeping, attorney's fees, CPA fees, all of that gets consolidated into just this one property. So, starting assumptions, biggest loser property with all of the operating overhead consolidated into just this one. All right, so here's how this shakes out. Potential gross rent is $18,000 per year, which is $1,500 times 12. Less 5% vacancy rate gives us effective gross rent of $17,100 per year. Now, utilities and water the tenants pay for, but of course, when a property is vacant, then you want to keep the utilities on, you want to keep the lights on when you're doing showings. So I'm going to put in $10 a month for utilities in order to amortize out 1 month's worth of utilities over the course of a year. Trash, by the way, instead of looking up like precisely what my trash bill is, I'm using like basically what are reasonable ballpark figures for any trash service, municipal trash service nationwide, right? So trash, $20 a month, $240 a year. Repairs and maintenance. The ballpark estimate for repairs and maintenance when you're doing a CapEx estimate is about 1% of the property price per year. So that doesn't assume any type of discount through your contractor. So repairs and maintenance at 1% of and I'm going to use 123 as the purchase price. You know what? Actually, screw it. Let's say that I paid double for the upfront renovations. So let's assume that I put in $6,000 instead of $3,000 upfront. So we're going to use 126 for the purchase price. In other words, we're going to artificially create a higher purchase price in order to really err on the conservative side and really adjust for economies of scale. So let's assume, in other words, I bought the house for 120, which I did, and instead of putting $3,000 up front, let's assume I put $6,000 up front. We're going to double that initial cost, and then we're going to base a lifetime worth of repairs, maintenance, and CapEx off of that. So repairs and maintenance at 1% of 126 is $1,260 a year. CapEx is an additional $1,260 a year. Management, flat 10%. I don't get any management discount for the number of properties that I have. It's at my level, 7 units. It would be unusual to get a property management discount. Typically, because property managers don't make that much, honestly, like the pay that they get relative to the work they do, it's not a lucrative profession. Yeah, I mean, they're not like eating cat food in the streets under a bridge or anything like that, but it is, it's not a profession where they have a huge amount of margin to make big discounts. And so typically what a lot of investors will do is when they get up to the point where they have, 20 or 30 or 40 units, at that point it can make more sense to just hire somebody to do property management in-house or to start your own property management company at that point. But the long and short of it is I get no discount from my property manager. So property management, 10%. That is 10% of effective gross rent. That's $1,710 per month. Bookkeeping, $36 a month. For me, that's spread out over all of my units. But for you, for this question, we're going to consolidate the entire bookkeeping fee into just this one property. So that bookkeeping is $432 per year. For CPA, I pay $1,400 per year to my CPA to cover all 7 units. For you, I'm going to estimate $1,000 to your CPA per year, and I'm going to put that entire $1,000 into just this one property. So $1,000 CPA fee annually, and we're going to say $500 annually to an attorney as well. Now, property insurance, the rule of thumb for homeowners insurance, when you're trying to estimate what that's going to be, is to divide the home value by 1,000 and then multiply the result by $3.50. So we're going to say that the home value is $126,000. So that divided by 1,000 times 3.5 puts our property insurance annually at $441 for this estimate. Property taxes is a big wild card. That's going to depend on your county, of course. But for a $120,000 house, I'm going to put property taxes at $3,000 a year. And liability insurance, I'm going to put it another $200 a year. So all of that being said, your operating overhead at this point comes to $10,043 per year. And again, that is assuming 0 discounts, and it is consolidating all bookkeeping, CPA, attorney's fees, all of that into just this one property. So with all of that, with 0 economies of scale, your operating overhead under this set of assumptions is $10,043 per year, which means your net operating income would be $7,057 per year. So your net operating income is your unleveraged cash flow. In other words, it's your effective gross rent minus your operating overhead. And so now that we've arrived at that, we can calculate the cap rate, which is the NOI divided by the purchase price of the property. Again, we're going to use the figure of 126 as the purchase price. That puts your cap rate at 5.6. So a 5.6 cap, what that means is that you are essentially getting a dividend payout from this house at a rate of 5.6. So imagine having a blue chip stock. Let's say that blue chip stock keeps pace with inflation, but nothing more. So the capital gain on the investment is equal to approximately the rate of inflation. And then in addition to that, that asset pays out a dividend at a rate of 5.6 per year. That's essentially what you're looking at under this set of assumptions, where you, let's say, have higher contractor fees and zero economies of scale, using my worst house, using the set of numbers that came from my Biggest Loser house. So your total returns on that would be 5.6 cap, plus if you assume inflation is about 3% annually, the total return would be approximately 8.6, the majority of which would come in the form of that dividend, that 5.6 dividend, which is your cap rate. Again, I can't tell you what a good or bad cap rate is because, of course, that's subjective and that depends on the risk-reward ratio of that neighborhood itself. But I'll just say I would buy a house with these numbers, assuming that the neighborhood was decent. I would demand a higher cap rate if it was a Class C neighborhood, but for something that's Class B+, as this house is in, yeah, I think that's totally cool. So I hope that answers your question. I guess to zoom out a little bit and let's look at the assumptions around what economies of scale am I getting. I'm not getting any economies of scale benefit for property management. I may be getting a slight benefit for my contractor, and I'm definitely getting a huge economy of scale benefit when it comes to CPA fees, bookkeeping software, and attorney's fees, because those are spread out over the 7 units. And a little bit of one in insurance as well. But all of the numbers that I ran within this calculation strip those economies of scale out. So yeah, that's my answer. And that's a very good question. You know, the way to get started is to get good returns. And as you do so, and as you continue to do so, your returns will hopefully over time continue getting better and better, partially because you have economies of scale, and partially, frankly, also because over time, you're more experienced. You know what you're doing more. I was having a conversation with somebody about this the other day. Anytime that you start something new, any new thing, whether it's playing tennis or cooking or driving, anytime you begin a new task, there is going to be that beginner's learning curve. And I think that even more so than economies of scale, one of the big components of uncertainty, particularly when you get into your first rental property, is that you will make some beginner mistakes. That's true of anything that you do in which you're a beginner, whether it's juggling or driving or cutting hair for the first time. No matter how well you train, yeah, there's always going to be beginner mistakes, and sometimes those can be expensive. And so that's just sort of par for the course, you know? But the longer that you're in the game, the less of those beginner mistakes that you commit. It's kind of, you know, that's why 25-year-olds tend to have better driving records than 16-year-olds, even though 16-year-olds arguably may have better hand-eye coordination just as a result of their youth. But the experience is what makes a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old a better driver, despite our declining hand-eye coordination over time.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then be sure to subscribe to Paula's YouTube channel. Not only is every podcast episode and Ask Paula question released here on YouTube, other creative deep thought videos are created just for you. Remember, you can watch anything, just not everything. Fill your YouTube viewing time with more videos to make you think and grow so you can afford anything. Go ahead, hit that little red subscribe button. We'll take care of the rest.